It's the blue collar breakdown. Welcome to the blue collar breakdown. Starting right now.
Hello, welcome to the Blue Collar Breakdown. This is Tom Eddlem here, the Blue Collar Economist. This is episode number 15, and today we're going to talk about recession. Are we headed to one? How can we tell? Of course, economic predictions are always difficult. I make no promises. In fact, most economists are terrible at predicting recessions and what will happen in an economy, but maybe I'll give you some ideas of what to think about. And maybe you can put something together today. Before I get started, however, I want to promote an article that the Libertarian Institute published today, Europe's Fake Immigrant Crime Wave Narrative and Its Salesmen. This is posted by the Libertarian Institute this morning, and I encourage you to read it because you're being lied to. If you listen to my episode number 11, that's basically episode 11, but with much greater detail. And I would encourage you to read that and share it with your friends. And also read and share everything from the Libertarian Institute. The Libertarian Institute's got great stuff. I'm one of the few people that covers economics. They focus more on foreign policy. Obviously, we have Scott Horton as our grand leader, and we've got great foreign policy guys like Kyle Anzalone and John Weeks and a whole bunch of others, and so a few others that are generalists. Like we've got Keith, who's great with general libertarian philosophy, but for the most part, the Libertarian Institute is foreign policy. Except me, I'm an economist. So, and let's go with I told you the news. Let's talk about how can you tell a recession is coming. And the simple answer is, well, you can't be sure. Recessions can be put off for a long time. And just because the government's doing something wrong doesn't mean it's doing enough wrong. And I guess what I'm saying is this. Just because one of my favorite commentators is Peter Schiff. I think he's entertaining. Sometimes he repeats himself. He's known as the sort of the prophet of doom or the perpetual bear because he's always predicting recession. And I think the problem with Peter Schiff is not that his economic analysis is wrong. It's always right when he's evaluating a particular policy. I don't know that I disagree with anything he's said economically as far as policies, like whether it hurts or helps the economy. But just because the government is doing one thing wrong doesn't mean the whole economy is going to go down. There's still a lot of things that can continue to go right. I think that if we learn anything from the last really 200 years of world history as well as American history, one of the things we find is that prosperity generally goes up. And the reason for that is people trade and they innovate, and it gets easier to make things because people can make things in fewer hours, and that creates more general wealth. Now, the question then becomes, is enough being done badly to drag us into the negative? We can, let me say, for example, the natural rate of growth, economic growth, is 4% GDP growth. And government taxes take it down 1%. And then, does a government do enough to take it below zero and we go into recession? That's one of the things I think you need to think about. Okay, so let's go. One of the key elements to economic growth is savings and investment. And one of the things we find here is in the United States, of course, I'm broadcasting to the United States, so other countries have higher savings. If you're in Singapore, you're in pretty good shape. If you're in Australia, you're in pretty good shape because they have relatively high savings rates. But if you look at America, and I got the comments here. Hello, guys, let's go. Yes, let's go. But if you look at America's savings rates, it's at very historic lows, except for the COVID thing right at the very beginning and the Great Recession. We're at sort of the lowest it's ever been in American history. So the opportunity for growth is pretty small here. Okay. One of the things that I've tracked over the years is that countries with very high savings rates tend to grow very fast. Well, what are the countries that have grown very fast? Well, a lot of the Asian countries have traditionally grown very fast. Certainly Japan before the last 30 years, South Korea, Singapore. Lately, Australia's been doing fairly well. These are the countries that have very high savings rates. All right. Some of them are by legislation. Singapore requires their people to save through their central provident fund. And Australia does too. They have a program that's kind of like our Social Security, but it's semi-privatized called superannuity. And as a result, they have fairly high savings rates. And their economies are fairly robust compared to the United States, compared to Japan. Japan's savings rate has been tanking lately. And savings is a big factor. So it doesn't look good that way. Okay. What about national debt? The United States has the highest debt it's ever had. It's over 120% of GDP. It's going to go up more under Trump's big, beautiful bill. The United States government has already been downgraded by all three of the major ratings agencies from AAA to AA plus, or I think it's AA plus. And I don't think that's going to be a major factor. I really don't. And one of the reasons why is if you could look at, let's see, I want to put Chuck's up a little bit bigger here. Let's see. Hold on a second here. See if I can put Chuck's messages up a little. There we go. All right. Chuck says, could it be that other countries like Europe are in even worse shape? Yes, it could be. Relative to others, we are doing well. Okay. I'm not sure we're doing better, but I think it depends on the country. Europe is in fairly rough shape because they have a lot of the same problems that we have, but it depends on the country. There's a pretty wide divergence in Europe between, say, the Scandinavian countries, which have fairly robust economies, high savings rates. Norway's benefiting from all that oil revenue. Ireland is doing very well, but then you go to a lot of the Southern European countries, and even a place like France, not so much. Germany's probably about the same spot we are, maybe a little bit worse. But let's focus back here at the United States. I don't think debt is the problem because I look at Japan, and Japan is my debt canary in the coal mine. Japan has a national debt that is roughly double what ours is as a percentage of GDP. Ours is roughly 120% of GDP. Theirs is roughly about 240% of their GDP. It's been going down a little bit lately because they have inflation, and inflation is a way to get rid of your national debt. The higher the debt, the more work inflation does is in reducing your debt to GDP ratio. So, but it's still up there in the 230 to 240% of GDP range. And Japan has paid a price for it. Their national credit rating has gone from AAA in the 1990s all the way down to A right now, which is only a couple of steps above junk bond status. You go to from A to A minus to BBB plus to BBB. And once you go below BBB, once you go to BBB minus, then you are in junk bond status. So they have a couple of steps yet to go. But because Japan has double our debt, I don't think debt is going to be a problem that drags us down in the short term. In the long term, I think it will. But in the short term, I don't think a year out, 2 years out, that's going to be a problem. Okay, job openings. One of the key factors is, is the economy doing well? Well, you look at, are people getting out of work? The number of jobs is going down. I'm going to just stop showing the small comments here, but I will put you guys up on the screen as soon as I show this chart, your comments. You can see here, this is a chart over 15 years, 20 years, more than 20 years. And you can see there was a huge uptick in the number of jobs. Keep in mind that our U.S. population is growing, so and these are nominal numbers, so it should be going up over time. The U.S. population was less than 300 million in the year 2000, and now it's over 330 million. So it should be going up. The general trend should be up, and it is, which is a good thing. But you can see the number of job openings is down in the last couple of years, and part of that is because of the post-COVID boom. Okay. All right. One more unemployment thing, and I'll get to your comments. The other one is the unemployment rate, and two things to look at this chart here. The first is you can see at the very end in 2025, the unemployment rate is ticking up a little bit, but it's not a lot. So that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, we're headed into recession. But if I look at this chart, I see that when the unemployment rate goes down, it tends to keep going down until it hits bottom, and then it shoots up. And basically, it hit bottom and it's shooting up. Now, how high up it goes, you can see there's a big difference there. I wouldn't look at 2020. That's exogenous to what we're looking at here. That was the government shutting down and creating unemployment for everyone. But you can see it can go pretty high to 10% or more, or it can just be a little bump. There are a number of fairly low bumps in the 50s and in the 90s, even in the early 2000s. So we could be going up to a minor recession, or it could be major. I don't know, but that's one piece of data I look at. Okay, let's go back to your questions here. Let's see. I'll go to Chuck and then Sick. All right. Could it be I already went to Chuck. Okay, next comment. Sick. What are your thoughts on the effectiveness of tariffs? I am going to get to tariffs. It's a little bit later, but I'm going to get there. Sick says, I've always viewed them as a band-aid, short-term solution to stop the bleeding. I'm not sure what you mean by that, but it could be. They are a tax, and they do have at least some impact on world trade and wealth in the United States. But I will get to that, because the tariffs are going to change in a big way in the next couple of months, and more so than they've already changed. Okay. All right. Let me go to the next here. Next one I've got. One of the other big factors in the economy is housing. Now, one of my fixations, and one of the next pieces I'm going to write for the Libertarian Institute, I have another one on immigration in the queue, but I'm writing about interest rates. And one of the interesting things is, and this is, I've said this in past podcasts, and I apologize if you've heard it. Almost every school of economic thought says if you lower interest rates, you stimulate the economy, and you especially stimulate jobs in the housing sector. But if you look at actual jobs in the housing sector, if you go to employment, you find that the low interest rates since the 2000s has not created jobs in the housing sector. It has not created new houses in the housing sector. And I have reasons for that. But the low interest rates have not really done that. But one of the things they have done is pushed up housing prices. And I want to show you two charts here really quickly. Here's the chart of U.S. housing prices. Now, one of the things you could see here is the housing prices are almost always up over the dark line, the zero line. They're almost always increasing, right? Because the real prices in houses are going up, even over and above inflation. All right. The only time in this century that they went down was very much in the housing crash of the dot-com bubble, and very, very briefly during the COVID or in 2022 when they raised the interest rate from 0 to 5%. But that was a blip, and they went back. They continued to go up. These I believe are real. This is real prices too. This is inflation indexed. So, even if it's 0, that means the prices are still going up to 2.9% of inflation. Okay, these are real prices. All right. So if you look at this chart, and I'm going to show you another chart about Australia, and the scale is different. All right, the scale of Australia is wider. It's showing a wider scope. This one is more focused. Okay, but if you look at the Australian chart, all right, real property prices in Australia, and they're much wider swings. They don't look like wider swings, but they in fact are, because instead of the markers are 5%, not 5%, but 10%. But one of the things you find is that there's a lot of downward pressure on housing prices in Australia. And one of the reasons for that is the Royal Bank of Australia keeps their interest rates at a higher rate than the Federal Reserve Bank. Okay, so they don't push up the price of housing as much as they do in the United States. And one of the things we need to think about, if we're worried about the economy going forward, is what is the Federal Reserve from about 2000 to about 2022-3, they kept in their discount rate at near 0. So that meant people could get mortgages at 3%. Most of the time, it did go up in 2006, but most of the time it kept those interest rates really low, and that kept housing prices going up. But then in 2023, they raised the discount rate up to about 4.5%, and that meant interest rates for houses went up, and that put downward pressure on the price of houses. And now the Federal Reserve has already lowered their discount rate 0.25%. A lot of people are predicting another lowered rate in October, and maybe that'll be the case. Maybe the Fed will do that. But if the Fed does that, if they keep lowering rates back down to 0, that's going to keep those prices of houses up. And if they if the Fed says, we've done enough rate cutting, then those prices are going to fall. They're going to fall quite a bit. My prediction is the Fed will lower interest rates because what they want is to serve the billionaires who require high real estate prices. They require that because, hey, it adds to real estate's value. The real estate investors can pull the value out and buy more properties and get more rents and get more loan forgiveness through inflation. So and they don't worry about the credit because the Federal Reserve just buys up a lot of the mortgage-backed securities anyway, so it doesn't matter. So that's a key factor to watch too. The Fed could go either way. I think Jerome Powell wants to be the next Paul Volcker and keep interest rates high, but I don't think he has the support on the Federal Reserve Board. I think the board is going to make him to bring interest rates back down to 0. And there's a lot of political pressure to do that too, because when the interest rates go lower, that makes it easier for the federal government to borrow. That will bring down the rate of treasury bills and the ability of the U.S. federal government to borrow money on the open market. So there's political pressure, there's the pressure from billionaires, and on the other side, all you've got is the peons, the working people who just want to be able to afford to buy a house, and they're not going to matter much in the end, I think. Okay, so there's that factor. The last factor I want to talk about is inflation. It's coming back, not to the extent. Oh, let me just put this federal. I thought this is kind of interesting. When we talk about interest rates and savings rates, remember the savings rates went down over time, and interest rates have stayed low until 2023. one of the things I noticed is that economic growth has slowed. Not so much on the downside. There haven't been more recessions. That if you look, there's actually probably fewer recessions, but there's a lot less recovery. There's sort of this economic malaise in the American economy. It's not going up much, and yeah, there's a couple of crashes, but it's the overall growth is much slower. I thought that would be interesting. Okay, now let's talk about money. This chart is kind of interesting. If you want to look at what's going to most impact the consumer price index, that when they talk about inflation, they say, oh, inflation is 2.9%. What they mean is the consumer price index, that basket of goods that measures the general price. What you want to look at for the most part is the M2 numbers. When M2 goes up, generally what happens is the CPI goes up. It takes a year or two, sometimes 3 or 4, but it does go up. And what you see here is, if you look over to the far right-hand side of, I think it's the right-hand side for you guys as well as me, of the chart, you can see in 2020, the amount of M2 went up dramatically. Of course, that created the inflation that we saw in 2022. And then the Federal Reserve started pulling back a little bit and taking some of the money out of circulation, and that helps bring inflation down in the 3% range, the CPI into the 3% range. But in the last year or so, they've started building up the amount of money again. So this is going to keep. It doesn't mean inflation is going back to 8%, but it does mean we're probably going to keep that 3%, above 2% level inflation going forward. So if we go into a recession, we're going to have inflation with it. All right. Okay. And then the last one I wanted to talk to, and I know you guys are, you're asking me, especially Sick, asked me about tariffs. So let's talk a little bit about tariffs. What impact do these tariffs have on the economy? I would say long term, one of the things you could do is you could create a new system of tariffs where you have a tariff designed to create revenue and cut taxes elsewhere. You could maybe even eliminate some taxes that, in the federal, in American history, the federal government ran on taxes only during peacetime before the Civil War. And even after the Civil War, all they had was the tariff and a tax on alcohol and tobacco. That's all they did all the way up to World War I, when in 1913, when they had the income tax. So you could do that. But this is not what Donald Trump is doing. He's changing the rates as they go. And one of the things that's happening here is that it's actually monkeying with the GDP numbers. Okay, if you look at the latest Bureau of Economic Analysis numbers on GDP, one of the things you see here is it says, for the second quarter, which is of 2025, the economy grew at a pretty robust level, 3.3%. If it does that for the whole year, that's a success. That's the best. That would be the best economic growth. These are real terms, not inflation adjusted. Okay, I mean, this is inflation adjusted, not real terms. So that would be the best growth we've had since the 1990s, except for the COVID snapback year, if it holds for all 4 quarters. But one of the things we find out is, if we look a little deeper, it's not that robust. Okay, one of the big things with GDP is they take exports and that gets added to GDP, and imports get subtracted from GDP. Okay, so if imports fall, then GDP just goes up, even though we don't make anything new, even though we don't make any more money. That's just the way GDP is. So what happened was, if you look here, downturn in imports. So we're not importing as much. Why? Because of the tariffs, right? And acceleration in consumer spending. So people started spending more. Why are they spending more? Well, because stuff got more expensive, including, if you've been to the grocery store and you buy coffee, like, wow, the coffee is way more expensive because of the tariffs. And it's also downturn in investment. That's also not good. So these numbers are all because of, not all, but heavily impacted by Trump's tariffs. So I don't expect the 3.3% to hold. But let me tell you what's going to happen with these tariffs. I looked at Trump's brief before the Supreme Court this in the last couple of weeks. He sent a brief before the Supreme Court because the importers are challenging the constitutionality of his tariff increases. The U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 7 says all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives. Article 1, Section 8 says Congress shall have the power to raise taxes, levies, and duties, and all that stuff, not the president. And yet here's President Trump saying, well, it's an emergency, I can do it. And he cites some law, the Emergency Economic, IEAA, I think it's called, that basically says, well, under certain circumstances, he can do it. But it's not going to hold up in the Supreme Court. It's going to be, at first I thought, well, a lot of these guys on the Supreme Court love to defer to the chief executive, especially Samuel Roberts and Samuel Alito and Ketanji Brown. Who knows where she's at? She might go along with whatever the president says too, although it happens to be Trump, so less likely because she was a Democrat appointee. But I thought, okay, well, Trump's still going to lose, but it's going to be 8-1, 7-2. Who knows? Maybe even a 6-3 vote. But his brief before the Supreme Court is so weak. I'm convinced it's going to be a 9-0. All of these tariffs are going to be struck down 100%, and they're going back to wherever they were before that. Trump's power is going to be nipped in the bud, just as his. I also think that over the last week he imposed a $100,000 tax basically on H-1B visas for technical people coming over to the United States, but they're not even that technical. All you need is a bachelor's degree to come over to the United States and work for a U.S. employer, and there are 600,000 of them. So, 600,000 times $100,000, that's a lot of money, but that's going to be struck down. The fee right now is $5,000 per employee. And it's just not going to stick. The Supreme Court is going to strike that down, just like it's going to strike this down, because the Congress makes those rules. They have those rules already in the statutes, and the power is in Congress, laid out. In duplicate. The U.S. Constitution doesn't repeat itself a lot, but the one thing it repeats itself on is Congress has the power to raise taxes. Congress has the power to spend money. And that's Congress right there. If Congress doesn't have that power, if the president can just raise taxes or spend money whenever he wants, we don't really have a Congress. We have a dictator. And so I think the Supreme Court's going to just strike it down. And what will happen next is all of these importers are going to go to the federal government and say, hey, that was an illegal tax we paid. We want a refund. And I think they're going to get it. A lot of them are going to get it. So all of this $300 billion that they're going to raise this year, it's all going to evaporate, and it's going to go back into the pockets of importers. And even though you paid more for your coffee at the grocery store, and you're paying more for your cinnamon and nutmeg to spice your Thanksgiving dinner and your fall spices and everything, fall baking goods, all that is not going to get refunded to you. I think that's where it's going, and it's going to happen pretty quickly. That's my prediction. All right, let me go to your comments and I'll give you a summary here. Okay. HB fee was wild. I get the sentiment, and I hope that it has a desired effect, but I agree it will probably be struck down. Yeah. I actually listened to a really good podcast. It was the Glenn Greenwald show, not Turning Point. What is his thing? I forget. It's Glenn Greenwald's show though. And he was off for the week, and he had Lee Fong on as his guest host. And they talked about the H-1B visa program. And here's two leftists talking about this immigration program. And they basically said and I agreed with them that the program brings people over as indentured servants because the employer holds their green card. The employer, as soon as the job is gone, the immigrant has to leave the country. So they are on a string, and it undercuts the U.S. labor market in a way that just letting them immigrate freely over would not do. So I'm as someone who is pretty free on immigration. I mean, I would like to see the old Castle Garden system of immigrants coming over, being decided on state by state, screening out the criminals, screening out the indigent, but basically letting anyone with means or a job to come over and set up shop. I would like to see that restored. That was what the federal government copied from the states when they took over in 1892 and created the Ellis Island system. But I would like to see the states regain it, ideally. But as someone who's for a relatively free immigration program, I want to get rid of the H-1B visa program entirely. And actually, I want to get rid of the refugee program, which is the only group of immigrants who qualify for federal and state financial aid across the board. The refugees are heavy users of welfare. Now, it's still, even though it's expanded dramatically, it's still a small category of immigrants. So immigrants as a whole still use up less resources than they pay in. But the refugees are heavy users of welfare, and I would get rid of the refugee program entirely. Let them come in just like normal people. It's interesting. I remember a couple of years ago there was talk about Syria and the Syrian civil war, and one of the complaints by the Islamophobes was that, did you know that Saudi Arabia hasn't, why should we admit any Syrians? Saudi Arabia hasn't admitted a single refugee from Syria. And it was true. Saudi Arabia has not admitted a single refugee from Syria. But they did admit 500,000 Syrians, which they called their fellow Muslim brothers, as immigrants. And I think that's the way it should be done. Not as refugees, but just as regular people. You check them over just like you would anyone else. They don't qualify for welfare. That would be the ideal way to do it. Anyway, I got off on immigration. I wasn't going to do that. But here we are. Okay, so what's my prediction? I don't know. But here's what I think. I think we are not headed for any robust growth. Donald Trump is still going to say, we got the greatest economy ever, but it's not going to be that. We're going to have, at best, sluggish growth. And I think at worst, a modest recession. I don't think it's going to be 2007. I don't think we're headed for a crash. I do think we are headed for a crash down the road. The sovereign debt crisis is looming, and it's going to get worse. And I think the first balloon to pop will be Japan. And then a lot of the Southern European countries like Greece and Italy, and the US will be weeks behind them. I think that's how bad it's going to be bad. But that could be a decade off. I really think they can keep this thing going for quite a bit longer. I don't see, they're using all kinds of accounting tricks now, and those accounting tricks will probably work a bit longer. So I don't see a major crash coming. But it's like the old story, right? If your neighbor loses your job, it's a recession. If you lose your job, it's a depression. All right. And some people are going to lose their jobs. I think unemployment is going to continue to creep up. How much, I don't know. I think GDP growth will continue to go down, especially with the uncertainty over the tariffs. When the tariffs are struck down, I think the markets will crash, then they will recover. I think there will be some job growth. And I don't think any job growth has already come out of the tariffs. It's not like manufacturing is really returning to the United States. manufacturing jobs are trailing off right now, and part of it is because of the tariffs. Trump and his economic advisors are not bright enough to realize that there's a difference between raw materials and finished goods. When Congress managed the tariffs, even when they were protectionist, they recognized the difference between manufactured goods and finished goods. They would put a heavy tax on finished goods and low to no tax on the importation of raw materials so that we could make the goods and sell them abroad cheaply. But what Trump has done is done sort of a an across the board tariff on finished goods and raw materials. And what that means is all the manufacturers in the United States are paying more for raw materials than their competitors abroad are doing, and that puts them at a competitive disadvantage. And as a result, a lot of them are going out of business, and that's the harm that's being done right now. Okay, so that's my prediction. I think that's about it. I think I did the podcast. Okay, not quite. Make sure you like on YouTube, like on Rumble, like on Spotify, like on where else am I? Facebook, all those places. Subscribe to this, and buy me a coffee. I don't think I put the link on today's show, but if you go on the past shows, you can buy me a coffee and contribute so I can do more of these podcasts. I have some ideas for some produced podcasts that I think you're going to like. And also buy my book on Amazon, Thomas R. Eddlem. And lastly, keep reading me at the Libertarian Institute. I hope to have another piece up next week at the Libertarian Institute. It will be on immigration, but I do have another piece that I'm working on central bank manipulation of interest rates that I think you'll find interesting. And do that. Keep watching. Same time next week, 8:30 every Wednesday, and maybe a produced piece here and there in addition. Hey, those of you guys who stuck through. Oh, wait, I'll do one more comment here. Let's see. We got? Do we have Chuck? Who we got? We got more comments. All right, before I go. France is about to get an IMF loan. Well, maybe. Their economy is kind of middling. They're not as strong as Germany. They're not as weak as Italy. But yeah, they're not doing terrible either. I still think Japan, Greece, and Italy are going to be my canaries in the coal mine, especially Japan. Okay, thank you guys, and we will see you next week.
The Federal Reserve Bank is the evil stank on America. Stank on America. The